The Nolan Wells investigation into the death of a shining star, Nolan Wells, has an altercation witness emerged. A witness that claims she saw an altercation at Horn Island. Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. I want to thank you for being with us.
Nolan Wells' case seems to be taking a backwards paddle. That's right. All of a sudden, a new witness have come forward. And what she had to say takes us back to the beginning. And we're about to get into it. But before we get into it, I need you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that you're alerted the next time I upload a new video. Remember, we talked about Katie in the beginning. This witness is bringing information that just may blow your mind. Let's talk about it. In the beginning of the Nolan Wells case, Warren sat down with Officer Tatum and stated that Nolan stayed back on the island with Katie. Then later on, more information came out stating that there was an altercation on the island, but the boys swore that that was not Nolan. Now we have a witness coming out and stating that she saw Nolan Wells get into an altercation over his phone on the island. Thanks to Secret Service Sam, he gave us an update regarding this. Take a look at this clip.
I have not spoken publicly about this before, but I witnessed an altercation involving Nolan Wells from a boat nearby. What I saw has stayed with me, and I believe it's important information. I have provided or intend to provide my account to the appropriate investigators because Nolan's family deserves the truth. Out of respect for the ongoing investigation, I won't speculate beyond what I personally observed. While I was on the boat near the area, I witnessed an altercation involving Nolan Wells and several other individuals. I saw what appeared to be an argument that escalated after there was a dispute involving Nolan's phone. I heard Nolan yelling for his phone to be returned. The argument continued after the group reached shore, and I observed a physical fight involving Nolan and multiple people. I also observed a young woman telling them to stop. At that point, I left the area because the situation had appeared to be getting worse. I did not remain long enough to witness what happened afterward. Everything beyond what I personally observed would be speculation, so I cannot honestly say what occurred after I left. Then she said she messaged one of the individuals that she saw, hey, I just want to say I was a passenger on another boat and I saw the argument between you guys and we'll go to the police with this information. I also have video footage. My husband doesn't show much, but it shows the argument that was taken and how you guys were upset at Nolan because of the young lady.
Could this account be correct and accurate? That's what we need to find out. But remember, we had the attorney make a statement and say that someone saw Nolan Wells in an altercation at approximately 6 p.m. and that was after the boys had left. Now, the timeline on this altercation that the new witness is stating, or is this one of the witnesses? We don't know the timeline because she didn't give it in this quote unquote confession, I want to say. But nevertheless, they wanted to say Nolan Wells wasn't involved in that altercation. However, we had other statements come out and said Nolan Wells was involved and it was over the phone and it was regarding Katie. And all of a sudden, Katie disappeared. Now we have lion-ass Brandon Tatum sitting down with Nancy Grace, giving a whole different account. This man is going to hell with gasoline draws on. But listen to what he had to say on Nancy Grace yesterday.
partier at Horn Island, that is significant. It could prove or disprove your friend's timeline.
Well, Nancy, I think that it's a big obstacle to climb here because I've never heard of this altercation whatsoever. Nobody that I've talked to have alluded that this altercation was real. And also Katie, whom I saw her text messages, she didn't even say this altercation occurred. What I will say is that if I was an investigator in this investigation, I want to hear that. I want to be able to compare that information to other things that we may have or other witness statements. But I don't think it's significant because it doesn't show if Nolan Wells was actually killed in that altercation. She's claiming that there was an altercation between him arguing with somebody else. There was a potential fight, but that doesn't get me to how did he drown? How did he get in the water? And how did he not recover and come home to his family? So I would take that into consideration. I would compare that to the other interviews that I've done, but I don't think it's significant whatsoever. However, I would be incredibly skeptical because there's no other statements that I've heard from anybody that comes even close to an altercation with Nolan Wells and others over a girl.
Now, we all know Officer Tatum is a big liar because he's going to hell with gasoline draws on. Okay. But either he's trying to save face, covering for the boys, or being paid to lie. We all know, or speculations is out there that he's in some type of arrangement because you see his bourbon sitting behind the attorney and all of that extra stuff. So we know he's tied into these people. But the clip I'm about to show you, this man just sat there and told Nancy Grace he'd never heard of it. But here is a clip of this man stating that someone DM'd him this very conversation that we just heard. And he didn't know the time. Then he started talking about 6 p.m. How you go from you don't know the time that they saw this, but it was at 6 p.m. in the end. This man, this whole case, this cover up is so unreal. But we all know why. Take a look at this clip.
Received a DM from someone DMing another person. Now I'm trying to leave these names out because I want to not mess this investigation up. I think law enforcement already have this. That alluded to the fact that, and I messaged this person because I want to talk directly to the person that I saw the DM from. And we haven't talked to this person yet. But the person said in the DM to another kid that is associated, not any of the kids that I interviewed to talk to, but that could be associated to some degree, that knew Nolan, that this person wrote a message saying, me and my husband saw you arguing with Nolan, and to the effect of you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. Now, the person did not say they saw a physical altercation. The person did not say what time they saw Nolan and this other person getting into an argument. Now, this is after Warren, their boat left. This may be somewhere around a little bit before 6. What I'm thinking at this point, with all that has been said, is that somebody knows exactly what happened to Nolan, or they saw him right before he died. I am not convinced that Nolan was just out there and drowned.
The unsurmountable amount of cover up in this case shows us, proves nothing but guilt surrounding those boys, in my opinion. This is absolutely ridiculous how they're stringing along these parents who just wants answers. The DA constantly trying to flip the script when she's unable to, because it always come back to backfire. She's debunked every time. No one should be above the law. This here shows us proof that these people think they're above the law, in my opinion. Nolan Wells' case needs justice.
Joe Scott, if there had been not a blunt force trauma that Officer Tatum is describing, but a fist fight, if there had been a fist fight, plus body in water for multiple days, body decomposition, would you expect to see red marks on the hands at that juncture, on the face? What would you expect if there had been a fisticuffs?
Yeah, you would see, well, first off, above discolored areas, like consistent with contusions. If there are facial strikes or just body blows, you can actually see abraded areas over the surface of his fingers, and these are very subtle sometimes. And if there is decomposition, which we believe there is, particularly per the second autopsy that was performed, he didn't make note of this. And can I go one more step with this? And this is kind of graphic, but people need to understand this. This physician that did the second autopsy actually did what's referred to as a coronal sectioning of the face. So there were multiple incisions made into Nolan's face in this autopsy, this second autopsy, and this guy didn't see anything. He didn't see anything that was of import, relative or indicative of blunt force trauma. And I would think that if there was contact, particularly if he's fighting a group of people, these sorts of things, you're going to have injuries probably on the leading edges, or what we refer to as the blade of the arm right here on the forearm, the back of the hands, the knuckles, those points of contact. And certainly if there's facial strikes going on with him, which we find with blunt force trauma many times with fisticuffs, as you say, you'll see these strikes, you'll see marks on the face. There's nothing to indicate that in the second autopsy. Now, what the state has, I don't know, but I do know this. I know they're saying they're done with the autopsy and that it's complete, which means the gross findings in the autopsy room, the tox, the histology, that means that autopsy report is complete. They just hadn't released their findings yet.
And speaking of that, Joe Scott Morgan, I've heard the same, that the autopsy is complete.
Yeah.
There are reports that there is no cocaine in Nolan's system. That's uncorroborated reports.
Okay.
But a good source. No cocaine in the system.
Yep.
Joe Scott, when the body has been in the elements, such as the water, for that long, how can I confirm if he had been drinking or not?
Oh, you can still pull a BA, blood alcohol, or blood ethanol level, as it's referred to. And again, Nancy, we're not talking about someone that has been down for weeks and weeks. We can still do the BA, and it can come from urine, blood. We can still draw urine and find it pretty effectively. You'll have what's referred to as qualitative. We've talked about this before, and I know you understand that, but so our friends understand, you have a qualitative amount, which they say, yes, it is present. And then you have a quantitative amount where they do the measurement of the BAC, the blood alcohol content. Just think about DWI, DUI, wherever you're from, those levels. And then we get up to those lethal levels. That's really what I'm interested in relative. And yeah, I'm interested in any of the other toxicological findings you might have relative to anything illicit or illicit drugs, but particularly with alcohol, because that has been kind of this thing that has been said over and over and over again. Well, let me see it. I want to know what the blood alcohol level was like. And historically, I would like to know what his level of experience has been with alcohol. As you well know, because of cases you've worked on in the past, Nancy, if you're a lightweight, if you've never had anything to drink and you start taking on copious amounts of alcohol, and you're kind of a neophyte in this area, it can have very, very lethal outcomes.
Let me understand. Joe Scott Morgan joining us, star of Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan on YouTube and Death Investigator. When I'm asking you, even if the body has been in the elements for a period of days, can I still get a blood alcohol? Maybe not from urine, but you certainly can't do a blow test. But can you take human tissue from one of the organs and extract a blood alcohol from human tissue?
No, it'd be very difficult. Generally, the liver is the best candidate. We'll spin that down. We'll take a section of it, spin it down, and liquefy it. But again, I submit to you, Nancy, that he has not been down long enough to compromise the ability to get at least a quantitative amount. Yeah, to get a BA.
Okay.
All right. Now that you've watched those clips, let's actually get into it. For 6 weeks, one piece of audio has driven almost every theory about what happened to Nolan Wells. A voice on a video, allegedly caught arguing on Horn Island shortly before he disappeared. "Give me my freaking phone, what are you doing?" Circulated on TikTok, cited by his family's attorney, played on national news, presented, again and again, as Nolan's own voice. There's a problem nobody sat with yet. It might not be him. 9 days after that clip went viral, one of Nolan's own friends came forward and said the voice was his, not Nolan's. 6 weeks later, that correction still hasn't caught up to the theory built on top of it. We're going to get into that, along with a new witness claim, a gap in the timeline investigators still can't close, and a discrepancy in the official boat records nobody's fully explained. Let's start with the basics, for anyone just catching up. What happened on July 4th? Nolan Xavier Wells was 18, a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. On July 4th, he traveled to Horn Island, a stretch of sandbar off the Mississippi coast, with a group of friends from high school, most of them white, according to reporting on the case, a detail that's drawn its own separate scrutiny online about whether race played any role in how this case has been handled. We're not going to speculate on that here. We're laying out what's confirmed. According to MDMR data, the boat carrying Nolan arrived at the island at 11:14 in the morning. Multiple boats were anchored nearby that day, people drinking beer and spiked seltzers in water that reached below their shoulders. A typical 4th of July crowd on a sandbar that draws that kind of gathering every year. At some point that afternoon, Nolan told his friends he wanted to stay behind and talk to a woman he'd met on the island. He planned to catch a ride back on a different boat rather than leave with his group. He was last seen near the island around 3 p.m. When he didn't come home that night, his mother and one of his friends called it in, which set off search efforts that began that night and continued into the next day, involving multiple sheriff's offices working both land and air. 2 days later, on July 6th, his body was found in the water near the northwestern tip of the island. If you've watched our earlier videos in this series, you already know the broader shape of what's followed: the sea tow distress call, the GPS records from that day, the questions around the autopsy. This video isn't recovering that ground. It's about what's surfaced since, starting with the audio everyone assumed was Nolan. In the days after Nolan's body was found, a video started circulating online. It had been taken from a boat near Horn Island, panning across the water toward a sandbar where people were standing and waiting. In it, a male voice can be heard yelling something close to, "Give me my freaking phone. What are you doing?" The clip spread fast, shared across TikTok, Instagram, and eventually picked up by national outlets. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, representing Nolan's family, cited that video at a press conference. He said his team believed the voice belonged to Nolan. When a reporter in the crowd asked how they could be sure, Crump said multiple people had independently identified it as him. That claim spread even faster than the video itself. It became the anchor for an entire theory, that Nolan had gotten into some kind of dispute over his phone shortly before he died, and that the dispute may have escalated into something worse. People built timelines around it. They tied it to the altercation claims that would surface weeks later. An entire framework of speculation grew out of one assumption about whose voice was on that recording. Then, on July 13th, one of Nolan's actual friends came forward. Trayston Shepard told a reporter that the voice in that video wasn't Nolan's at all. It was his own. He was the one yelling about a phone, not Nolan. That's not a small correction. It's the foundation the entire altercation over the phone theory sits on. And according to someone who was actually there with Nolan that day, it may be wrong. To be clear about what this does and doesn't prove, it doesn't mean there was no altercation involving Nolan at some point that day. It doesn't mean nothing happened to his phone. What it means is that one specific piece of viral evidence, treated by a lot of people online and in the media as confirmed fact, was never actually confirmed at all. And the correction never traveled anywhere near as far as the original claim did. Most people who saw that video still believe, right now, that it's Nolan's voice on it. That brings us to a newer claim, one that's been circulating on TikTok under the account Secret Service Sam. A woman says she was on a boat near Horn Island that day and witnessed an altercation involving Nolan directly. Her account is specific, which is part of why it's gotten traction. She says she saw an argument break out on the water, one that appeared to be over Nolan's phone. She says she heard him yelling for it to be returned. She says the argument continued after the group reached shore, and that it turned into a physical fight involving Nolan and several other people. She says a young woman nearby tried to step in and stop it. At that point, she says, she left the area because things seemed to be getting worse, and she didn't see what happened after that. She's also said she reached out directly to one of the people she saw in the altercation, telling them she witnessed the argument and planned to go to police. And she says her husband filmed part of it, though by her own account, the footage doesn't capture everything that happened. Here's where we have to slow down. A specific account like this is worth taking seriously, because specific details can actually be checked. That's different from a vague claim like, I have a bad feeling about this. What boat was she on? How far away was she standing? And was her view blocked by anything? Did she already know what Nolan looked like, or is she working off assumptions after the fact? What time did this happen, and does it line up with the MDMR data placing Nolan on the island? If her husband really filmed part of it, is that footage the original file, untouched, with metadata intact, or has it been edited or clipped for social media? And the most important question of all, has she actually turned her information, including any footage, over to law enforcement? That last question matters more than almost anything else here. Posting something publicly and formally reporting it to investigators are two very different things. You can put a claim in front of 500,000 people online, and that still doesn't mean a detective has sat down with you, reviewed your original footage, or taken a formal statement. As of now, it isn't confirmed that this account, or any footage tied to it, has actually reached the sheriff's office. Until that happens, this stays exactly where it should. A claim worth investigating, not a fact worth repeating as though it's settled. Independent of any single witness claim, there's a broader problem investigators are still working through. The timeline itself doesn't fully connect, and it hasn't for 6 weeks now. A 22-page independent review, done separately from the state's investigation, looked at the available photos, videos, GPS data, and witness accounts from that day. It didn't accuse anyone of anything, it just found a hole. A material gap between the last independently corroborated sighting of Nolan and the confirmed departure of the boat that brought him there. The report draws no conclusion about whether a crime occurred. It just says that stretch of time doesn't add up cleanly yet, based on what's currently verifiable. That could mean a witness misremembered the time by 20 or 30 minutes, which happens constantly. It could mean the GPS data has gaps, or it could mean there's a piece of this nobody's found yet. The report doesn't guess. It just names the gap and leaves it for investigators to close. One more thread worth mentioning. A discrepancy has surfaced between an MDMR report, which names the searched vessel as a tidecraft, and other references, including from people connected to the case, calling it a tideline. Two completely different boat brands, not a typo. If those really are two different boats, investigators may have pulled GPS data off the wrong vessel entirely. But we don't know that yet. It could be a clerical error. It could be a real mismatch. Nobody's confirmed which, so we're not going to pretend otherwise for a dramatic headline. Here's what's actually confirmed right now. The state's autopsy is complete, but sealed until it goes to a grand jury, standard procedure per DA. Angela Myers McElrath, not unique to this case. A separate independent autopsy, commissioned by Nolan's family, came back undetermined, with real limitations tied to how long his body had been in warm Gulf water. Crump's team is still pursuing their own investigation too. Forensic audio specialists reviewing the full CTO call, ocean engineering experts examining how Nolan's body ended up where it did given the tides that day. Sheriff Ledbetter has repeatedly asked people to stop spreading unverified claims, while still asking anyone with real information to come forward directly. Nothing here proves what happened to Nolan Wells. His family is still waiting for an answer that actually holds up. Not the loudest theory. The real one, whatever it turns out to be. We'll keep separating what's confirmed from what's just noise. Subscribe if that's the kind of coverage you're here for. See you in the next one.